I was talking with my neighbor, and for some reason we got on the topic of choosing a profession. I remembered my childhood and that moment when it was already time to think, who do you want to be? And here is what is interesting. My profession was chosen in the end by my parents for me. And if back then, at that age, I had been asked, Diana, what do you want to be? I probably wouldn't have been able to answer this question at all, because I really didn't know. But now, when I look at my childhood already through the eyes of an adult, it becomes very interesting to me how well my real inclinations were visible there. From a very early age, I had a very well developed creative and entrepreneurial streak. Of course, at 7 years old, I didn't understand this at all. But now, remembering what I did, I think, how could one not notice this? I was 7 years old. I just went to the first grade, and I was already organizing entertainment events for kindergartens. I gathered my small team. At first, these were two of my classmates, my best girlfriends, and then I started to involve other boys from my class. I wrote scripts, put on plays based on famous children's fairy tales, made up performances where we sang, danced, did some acrobatic numbers, and much more. It was me who was the main organizer of all this mess. That is, I didn't just participate. I needed to figure out what we were gonna do, gather people, distribute roles among them, and then make all of this happen. And then the most interesting part started. At 7 years old, I went to different kindergartens, met with the managers, negotiated with them, and quite seriously offered, we want to come to you with our team and perform for your children. And as payment, it was enough for us to get the food that they cooked, because we just adored the food that they cooked. And for us, this was an absolutely normal deal. We give you a show, you give us food. And right there, my two main streaks crossed wonderfully, creative and commercial. At 12 years old, I tried myself as a watermelon seller. Only now they paid me money for this, especially since I was very good at selling. In generally, communication with people and the ability to interest them always came easily to me. At the same time, I didn't need to go to work at all. It was exclusively my own choice. I was interested in what it was like. I wanted myself. And my parents didn't talk me out of it, didn't take my money away, and that, on the contrary, supported me. He made an agreement with the owner I worked for so that I wouldn't be cheated out of my pay. After all, I was a kid, and it would be very easy for an adult to take advantage of the fact that a child simply doesn't understand many things. This is how I earned my first money. In parallel with all this, I did gymnastics, I went to a drama club, played in plays, participated in different productions. I also drew very well, for which I was constantly praised at school. I did ballroom dancing, participated in competitions, and even took prizes. At school, there were constantly some amateur art contests, and I very often participated in them, especially in vocal contests. And when I got older, I was the captain of the stand-up team. I wrote scripts, worked on the costumes, participated in the full staging of our performances. My humor was also always on point, so I really liked all of this. That is, if you look at all of this from the outside now, I was a pretty versatile child precisely in the creative plan. And with all these obvious inclinations, my parents for some reason chose completely different professions for me. First, they sent me to study to be a crane operator, and then when I couldn't finish that, they transferred me to another place where I was supposed to become a seamstress. Both of these professions appealed to me not at all. I got neither pleasure nor interest from them. Therefore, naturally, I didn't finish either of them. And then, at some point, I just left home. I was about 16 years old. In my family, by the way, everything was normal. This wasn't a story about some offending me or something terrible
Connect
happened
charger.
at home. I just completely disliked the rules. Probably I never really liked living by someone else's rules. And at some point, I decided that I was already old enough to arrange my own life. That's how I set sail on my own. The first place I got a job was a cafe where I worked as a waitress, and I really liked this job. I was good at finding an approach to people. I was always quite sociable, easily made contact. I had a good sense of humor. In general, I always loved creating good atmosphere around myself, plus my entrepreneurial streak and ability to sell. So I earned quite well and didn't complain much about life. Later I worked in different places, but almost always it was either sales or the service sector. That is, the same story kept repeating: people, communication, and sales. In parallel, of course, I dreamed of making my first million, and therefore I managed to get into all sorts of MLM companies like Oriflame, Amway, Avon, and other bullshit. And of course, not a single one of these big plans ended with a million. Although interestingly, things went pretty well for me there too. I knew how to attract people, talk to them, interest them, and build my teams. But in such businesses, there is one nuance. If you didn't get there at the very beginning, reaching a truly high level is already quite difficult. All these stories about how someone made a fortune on MLM are mostly fairy tales. You really can make money if the company just opened, has a normal product, and you are among the first, and everyone else in most cases just works for the income of that very top. Long story short, it's a dead end. During this time, I managed to get married. We had many friends. We often gathered together, visited each other, and almost every meeting of ours turned into a special event, because just gathering, sitting, talking, and getting drunk was not for me. I definitely had to come up with something. Thematic meetings, games, contests, performances, some shows. I wanted people to have a good time, and our friends really liked this. And at some point they started telling me, Diana, why don't you make money from this at all? You are so good at it. You have a great sense of humor. You know how to organize people. Why don't you try to make a job out of this? At first, I didn't take it seriously at all. I thought, what kind of job? What does this have to do with anything? I just love organizing our meetings. I didn't consider myself as talented as my friends and acquaintances saw me. But when different people start telling you approximately the same thing, it works like water wearing a weight stone. And at some point, you already start thinking, and maybe really something will work out for me in this direction. And one day my girlfriend asked me to organize her wedding and be the host at this event. Here is where I got scared, because organizing a party for friends is one thing and a wedding is completely different. This is a big responsibility. This is one of the most important days in a person's life. But my friend said she didn't want to trust this day to anyone else. She was sure that I was the one who could handle it. And in the end, I agreed. This is how I started my very first business. And right at her wedding, I got an order for the next one. And then I thought for the first time, probably this really is mine. I really liked what I was doing. I liked inventing, organizing, communicating with people, creating an atmosphere. And I suddenly realized that you can not only catch a high from this, but also make a huge money. After that, I started doing more and more of this direction. I did advertising, tried on my own to promote myself, to declare myself as a specialist, and I did all of this myself. I don't complain about that period at all. I was interested. The only thing that really threw me off back then was my husband, because he didn't just not believe in me, he demotivated me in every possible way. He didn't believe in me when I worked for someone, didn't believe when I tried doing MLM, and didn't believe when I started my own business. He thought all of this was bullshit, not a business, and said he would start respecting my business only when it brought at least as much money as his business brings. Honestly, I can't say that I took this as some kind of challenge. I wasn't trying to prove anything to him. I just kept doing what I liked and making my own money. I believed in myself very, very much. The business started growing very fast. I got a large customer base. There was more and more work, and pretty quickly I realized that I physically couldn't handle it alone anymore. I started involve my brothers and sisters, hiring other specialists in the team, photographers, videographers, DJs, because we weren't just running events anymore. We started doing full support for them. Hosting, decor, organizing children's parties, adult event promos, various corporate events. In general, things started rolling very seriously, and pretty quickly I started earning not just as much as my husband. I outgrew him, and he really didn't like that, but it will be probably talk about this separately, because there a completely different story begins about how all of this affected me. I reached the regional level, became recognizable in my field. I didn't have a deficit of clients. On the contrary, there was a lot of work. I worked with private clients and with state institutions. That is what once started with kindergarten food for children's parties, in the end turned into a full-scale business. And then war happened, and we had to move to another country where I had to start almost from scratch again. But it was then that I got another direction, the beauty business, and I started working in two fields at once. In parallel, I had to study entrepreneurship, laws, work rules, local market specifics, and even the mentality over again. Because before it seemed to me that the mentality between Ukrainians and Russians is the same, but when you start living in another environment, you understand that there are actually many more differences that you thought. I had to adapt, learn, try, start again. But in the end, if you look at this whole story as a whole now, I understood that what our parents choose for us is not necessarily what we need to do in life. And I'm not blaming my parents at all right now. They choose based on what they knew and what they considered right at that moment. They simply couldn't know me the way I know myself now. And perhaps the biggest mistake is trying to choose a profession for a person without first trying to understand the person himself, to see what he really likes, what he's good at, what his abilities are, what he does with pleasure even when nobody pays him for it. Because sometimes that is exactly where the answer is. At 7 years old, I didn't know that someday I would be an event organizer. I didn't know what I would host wedding, that I would build teams, that I would do business. I just did what I liked: organizing people, inventing, selling, communicating, performing, creating something of my own. And probably if back then someone had just looked at me not from the position of what profession should you choose, but from the position of what kind of person are you anyway, the answer would have been much more obvious. Therefore, I think more and more now that before choosing a profession, you should try to understand yourself, not only what you like, but what comes to you naturally, because it's very often that talent, pleasure, and money intersect. And perhaps it is right there that the very things you should actually be doing is located.